Joe, I know you've been looking at some new poll numbers for the president coming out of Gallup.
Yeah, no doubt about it. Gallup poll it's been a tough poll for Donald Trump, but he actually, over the past month or so, he started moving into the low 40s, got up to 41, 42, 43%. In fact, he started doing better in a lot of polls that had him in the 30s in the past. But Walter, we saw Quinnipiac a few weeks ago getting back down into the 30s, and now Gallup, which has been with us for a very long time, now Gallup has him back down in the 30s after the disastrous child separation policy, the fact that they've botched that. They've actually turned it over to the ACLU because they're so incompetent. They can't find the parents of these children that they intentionally ripped from their arms and separated. And then, of course, I think that Helsinki summit, where Donald Trump looked so weak, and as the Europeans said, he looked like Putin's poodle. I think that lasting image is just sticking even in the minds of some loyal Republicans and independents that say, God, even if we voted for the guy, we hate seeing our president look so weak and feckless and like a lapdog for a ruthless ex-KGB agent who's now running Russia.
You know, it's pretty hard to get down in the 30s when the economy is doing so well. And I think what's really going to change things is if there's any change in the economy. That's a great correlation. Gas prices have gone up a little bit. Usually that's a great correlation for presidential popularity. When they go up, the president's popularity goes down. And at the moment, you're starting to see breaks, not in the economy, which overall is pretty good, but the tariffs are starting to cream small business owners, medium-sized farmers, shippers, everything else. The uncertainty that he does by all the tariff and trade agreements. So I think we got to look at the economy, and if the economy starts to falter at all, if we start seeing inflation because of the surge of stimulus spending that happened, if we start to see interest rates go up even higher, when you're at 39% and you start dropping, that's really bad.
Yeah, Willie, what do you think about that? Walter brings up a great point. We have unemployment under 4%. The economy's doing pretty darn well in a lot of ways. Wages aren't exploding, but they're not going down. All in all, really good economic days. Walter's right. It's hard to be in the 30s in any poll when the economy's doing this well. What do you think's dragged Trump down?
Well, I think, if you look at that Ohio 12 district that he won by 11 points, and it looks like we'll get the final provisional ballots and mail-ins in, but the Republican may hang on for a 1-point win there. It's those suburban women we talked about, that kept Roy Moore out of office in Alabama, for example, around Birmingham, suburban women around Columbus who took a flyer perhaps on Donald Trump the first time around and weren't ready to go along with him this time. That's one snapshot, but I think it's part of what's going on. And I do think your point about Helsinki is a good one, talking to Republicans who say that was a basic moment of sticking up for your country. You stood on the stage next to the bad guy and you were asked to stick up for your country, and you failed at that. And I think that moment has stayed with a lot of people in this country.
I think so. And Michael Steele, for some reason, I keep going back when people talk about Donald Trump's strengths in the party and his weaknesses in the party. I keep going back to the Iowa caucuses and the Des Moines suburbs and how well Marco Rubio did in the Des Moines suburbs. And then Marco won, I believe, in Minnesota as well, which had the same type of suburban educated voter. Donald Trump really does have blind spots in those suburbs, unless he's running against Hillary Clinton. But here's a problem for Donald Trump and the Republican Party. He will never run against Hillary Clinton again. So you could see very early on in Marco's results in the suburbs that that was going to be a blind spot for Donald Trump. They're just, right now, there aren't enough suburban voters in the Republican primary to make the difference for candidates like Marco Rubio.
I think that's exactly right, Joe. That's where the hemorrhaging has begun for quite some time now. As a matter of fact, you've seen this slow ebb away from the Republican Party in those suburban areas. The concentration of voters now in the cities that were once considered small cities are now growing into medium-sized cities is another problem. And then when you project this forward, given everything else that we know, I think the cornerstone of the vote going into any election cycle will be the white female vote. And so without a Hillary Clinton to beat up and to push around and to remind voters you don't like her, it now becomes more about the president, the guy who wants everything to be about him. Well, guess what? Yeah, this is now all about you. And the response that the voters are beginning to show is we're not as interested as we once were. And that's a problem for the Republicans in November, and it'll be a problem going into 2020. Now, the saving grace, Joe, as you've talked about on this program for quite some weeks now, Democrats have come to the table with what? What's the countervailing message here to give those suburban voters something to latch on to as they move away from Republicans?
So, Walter, you got to take Michael's point that, look, this election will be about Trump. Trump is all-consuming. He's taken over every news cycle forever, backwards and forwards in time. But if you would talk to some political scientists, what they might tell you is, if you take an incumbent president in a good economy, that person is an odds-on favorite to win re-election. I'm skeptical of the skepticism. I think if I had to place some bets, I'd give him odds. What's your opinion on the next 4 years of Trump?
Well, I do think that if the economy keeps roaring ahead, any president's difficult to beat. But the message you would give is that this is an administration of pure corruption. They said they were going to go there and fight for you and make sure you got your due. And instead, they were like pigs at the trough. They gave themselves big tax breaks and they were corrupt. Secondly, it's an administration of cruelty. We're not in America that does things like rip families apart. And third, it's an administration that lacks character, whether it's Omarosa or Donald Trump. It's like a reality TV show if people don't tell the truth. So I think that's a type of message that could work if it was a Democrat who connected with the economic concerns of ordinary Americans.
Heidi Przybyla, jump in here.
Yeah, I just don't know, Walter, if we can actually look at the age-old economic indicators and make the same assumptions that we've made in past elections. Reagan famously asked, are you better off now than you were 4 years ago? When you look at post-tax cuts, we already see in the economic data that inflation is eating out the wage increases, however minimal they are. They're being actually subtracted from. You've got the farmers who have a lot of angst about these tariffs. Healthcare prices are set to go through the roof this summer and into 2019. And I just don't see that in the data, many average Americans are feeling a huge boon from these tax cuts when we see that the majority went to stock buybacks by big corporations. And I will tell you that later this week, there's a survey coming out showing that CEO pay exploded in Trump's first year in office.
Well, you make a very good point on health care, too. I think that the Trump administration now owns health care is going to be falling apart. And when people can't get health care coverage, they're going to blame the Trump administration.
Well, and I think to your point about the economy, it's interesting to watch Wisconsin today, just because you look at how in the primaries it's been contentious over where these Republican Senate candidates who are vying for the nomination, where they stand pro-tariff, anti-tariff, are they supporting Donald Trump? And then Democrats are forced to flip the script a little bit and be a little bit more pro-trade than they otherwise normally would have been. And you have Donald Trump attacking Harley Davidson and on the eve of a primary. And I certainly think that the trickle effect from people being impacted, be it a farmer or a manufacturer, by November, at least, that's going to be baked in a little bit.
So, Michael Steele, if you're running the DNC right now and you're trying to come up with an attack against the Republican Party or a campaign against Republican candidates in 2018. Walter talked about corruption, cruelty, lack of character. Heidi talked about those tax cuts for the rich, also health care. Boy, there is a lot for Democratic candidates to choose from. What do you think is the one or two most potent issues against Trump Republicans?
I think right now, when you stop and think about it, it's probably going to be the combination of the tariffs and the impact on the middle of the country, which is really Donald Trump's kind of core base of support, and the irony of health care. Because what's going to happen at the end of September and beginning of October, talking about inflation eating away at that tax cut that you got, or eating away at the pay raise you got, will be the health care premiums you'll start to pay. When the announcement comes out, the 30, 40, 50% increase in health care premiums because of the rollback on the mandates, which the president is applauding and those hardcore Trumpers are saluting. But the fact of the matter is their insurance provider is going to say, and here's the bill. And that is going to be the ultimate check. And if the Democrats can make that narrative stick at the same time people are getting those notices, that is going to drive a lot of folks to the polls to express their displeasure, because their paychecks will get a lot smaller when they have to give 30% more to the health insurance companies.
So, Elise, where do small government conservatives like you and me go in November? Think about it. The largest spending bill in the history of the government by Trump Republicans, the highest national debt in the history of this country by Trump Republicans, massive deficits, high tariff taxes, absolutely the worst fiscal responsibility we've ever seen. Where do small government conservatives go this fall?
Well, you stay at home or you decide to vote for a Democrat. I think that is what it comes down to. And you look at small government conservatives who held their noses and voted for Donald Trump despite what they knew about his penchant for spending and for debt. And are they just going, they might have voted in protest to Hillary Clinton and voting against Hillary Clinton, and she's not going to be on the ballot in 2018. It's up to Donald Trump at this point. And I look at women and the Republican Party, and Steve Bannon was quoted a couple of days ago saying that Republicans just shouldn't even bother with women anymore. Well, that's a great electoral strategy, just discount half of the population. So if that's the attitude of the Republican Party, maybe they can cling to a few wins here and there, but in the long term, it's just not viable, says someone from that segment of the population.
Michael Steele, all the former RNC director can do is chuckle at this point.
Oh my God, that is the most lame brain thing I've ever heard. Yeah, let's just ignore 50+% of the population. Okay, yeah, just ignore it.
Heidi, Elise mentioned the tweet from the president about Harley Davidson. There's a primary today. The president tweeted basically encouraging the boycott of Harley Davidson in Wisconsin.
Wow.
He might have encouraged a boycott of cheddar cheese in that state. Cheese curds, yeah. But Harley says these tariffs are going to cost them $100 million a year, and they may just have to move productions overseas because of the president's tariffs. Then Donald Trump attacks that institution inside the state, putting Scott Walker in kind of a bind of not criticizing Trump, but obviously wanting Harley to stay put in his state.
So he may be able to bring some bikers to Bedminster to pose for photo shots, but that explains why, in part, we are seeing what we're seeing in this competitive map in 2018, which is that it is not just these suburban swing districts that everybody expected to be the competitive battlegrounds. It's actually some of the districts where Trump swept, these working class districts, or at least districts that have a large working class contingent, like Ohio's 12th, where Trump led by or won by 11 points, and now it's still too close to call. And that is because people are seeing it, the farmers are seeing it, the Harley Davidson employees are seeing it. And at the end of the day, if the president is not producing those jobs, that's going to come back to hurt him, because that was his number one promise to these people, was that he was going to bring jobs back to the forgotten man.
You made a really good point about the Harley Davidson and every Wisconsin politician having to then answer it. These are all local local races that are happening now in the midterms. And every Republican on the ballot every week or so has to say, do you agree with Donald Trump attacking Harley Davidson? All these Wisconsin politicians, you watch pirouettes and dances that would have dazzled Diaghilev as they twisted themselves into finally saying, no, I don't agree with the president.
Yeah, Governor.
And Scott Walker has got to figure out he's spending all this money to bring a Chinese company to Wisconsin.
Foxconn.
He has to explain why the president is driving Harley Davidson out of Wisconsin.
Well, and his explanation on the trail has been, of course I want Harley, this is Scott Walker, of course I want Harley Davidson to stay put, and I believe we'll get there because the president says he wants to get to a place of no tariff, sort of twisting himself in knots.
Well, and you've also seen Scott Walker having to defend Foxconn and the huge incentives that Wisconsin is throwing at Foxconn, and Donald Trump has been hugely supportive of that at the same time that Harley Davidson, just an iconic American company, that he's berating them over Twitter constantly, and the timing. I mean, just really. Why wasn't it Sunday, I think? Really, he had to do that before the Tuesday primaries and force all of the Republicans to take a stand and divide the electorate.
And the same weekend, he had Bikers for Trump on their Harleys at Bedminster. Still ahead this morning, we are following the latest on those secret recordings from inside the White House. Politico's Jake Sherman joins us for that discussion. Morning Joe's coming right back.
Thanks for checking out MSNBC on YouTube, and make sure you subscribe to stay up to date on the day's biggest stories. And you can click on any of the videos around us to watch more from Morning Joe and MSNBC. Thanks so much for watching.